Sure. I just wanted to say thank you guys for, having us. We're pretty excited about all these upcoming projects with the VA. I actually work with the VA. I work in a different group than John. He works on the facility side. I work in what's called CFM. It's when they do major construction, like our upcoming projects are. And we really look forward to, getting your input and with the Neighborhood Association. Brian McClure is my counterpart on with the USACE, or the Army Corps of Engineers there in Portland. And he's a way better presenter than I am. So without further ado, there's Brian.
All right. Thanks, Cheryl.
Good evening, everyone. Cheryl, thank you. I might share my screen. I have a few things that I'd like to discuss, but just for the purposes of you guys not having to look at my ugly face, I might just give us something else to take a look at while we're talking to. And it's probably just going to be a Google Earth image of the campus itself. That way, as I'm talking through some of these items, maybe I can use my cursor here to kind of orient us. Before I talk through the project itself and why we're excited to meet with you this evening, just start with a little more about the relationship. So Cheryl and I are counterparts. Effectively, Cheryl has the responsibility to the medical center, being a VA employee, to deliver this program for the medical center itself and the VA. Effectively, the Corps of Engineers is a subcontractor to Cheryl's organization. We are partnering and assisting the VA CFM office with the execution of this program. So kind of blending the two best things that the organizations do into one cohesive team to deliver the project. So that's why you see Brian McClure with the Corps of Engineers here talking to you about a VA project. So in case there's some on the phone who haven't made that link and haven't understood that from, the evolution of the project, I just wanted to make sure that was clear. And then one other important detail, I think, overall, the reason this project was initiated and has become what it has become is that the two largest buildings on campus there were identified through a study VA nationwide to determine which buildings were the greatest at risk to their staff and their patients from a seismic perspective. And these two structures, Building 100, the largest structure in the center of campus, when that study was completed, was the fourth riskiest structure that the VA owned in its entire portfolio for how it would fare and respond to a seismic event. The Building 101, the administration building next to it, to the left here on the screen, that building was the 44th highest at-risk building in the VA's inventory. So it was that study that yielded a need to address these two buildings, get them up to current code capacities so that they would respond well in a seismic event. And then there are some other ancillary things that have developed as a result of this project coming to fruition. So I'll pause there for a moment before I go any deeper into the scope of work itself and just kind of give you an overview of why we wanted to have this opportunity to talk with you here this evening. So as part of the environmental assessment that was performed by Cheryl's team to generate all of the requirements that satisfy the NEPA requirements, the environmental requirements for the project, one of the outcomes of that was that the recommendation was made, or the commitment was given, I don't know how to phrase it, that a neighborhood communications plan needed to be developed. And there needed to be a very clear, very well-defined process through which the government and the neighborhood association were able to pass information back and forth, a way that you could get routine updates from us, you could understand and digest where we were in the project, what things were upcoming in the next near term and future, and then you could have a forum to submit questions, to ask things of us, so that we were in regular communications, and that the neighborhood association didn't have their meetings every month and their coordination say, well, I wonder what they're doing over there. I wonder what's coming up next. We wanted to create this partnership so that everything we're doing is very clear to you. You understand what we're doing well in advance of it happening. And if you have questions or concerns, we can field those and try and make adjustments or consider those things as we're executing the program. So that's the main goal this evening, is to hopefully not to make decisions tonight, but to leave you all with an understanding of where we are right now, where we're planning to go, and for us to establish whatever works best for your organization, for us to have that normal means of communication, whether it's us presenting to you at monthly meetings, whether it's us sending out, a monthly newsletter, whatever that may be. That's kind of some of the stuff we want to talk to you about. And then maybe next month, once you've had a chance to think through it, you guys can give us your feedback on how you would best like to see this communications plan developed and kept up to date between the government and the neighborhood association. So before I talk about the scope itself, does anyone have any questions to that end?
Well, I guess just off the top of my head, Brian, I like the idea of, I really appreciate you guys being here and reaching out to us. And what you're saying sounds like a really good idea in terms of a communications plan. And if you give us a little while to figure it out, we'll probably come back and have some requests. But the first thing that comes out to me is, have you developed a, I can't remember the right term, but like a plan that is an overall timeline with major points identified along the way? And I'll leave it at that.
We're going to talk, as I'm introducing the various scope portions of this program, I'm going to talk them in the context of general years that you'll expect these things to happen. Some of the upfront stuff will be more on the order of months. Some of the things that longer term, I'll talk about in the context of years, because we have a general understanding of the length of time this whole program might take, but nothing has been codified in stone yet to say it will absolutely start on this month and finish on this month and year. So I will talk to it in terms of some generalities based on the information we have at this time. I'll tell you as much as we know, I suppose, if that makes sense.
Good. Anybody else have questions? Okay, good. Oh, Bob Bonner, go ahead.
So as the Friends of Terwilliger were really very concerned about this project from the impact on the Terwilliger Parkway, and we thought that it probably needed a more detailed environmental assessment. But when you start doing the plannings, we would really very much like to hear some of the early plannings and how you're trying to make sure that you don't have an impact on the scenic qualities of Terwilliger Parkway. And I think just so being in contact about the early plans of any design elements that might impact the parkway.
Certainly, and what jumps right out at me when I hear you mention that as a concern is that in a future meeting, it might be advantageous for Cheryl or I to tap into their environmental team who executed that environmental assessment and have them potentially be able to speak directly to some of the considerations that have been made thus far, some of the outcomes or outputs from that assessment, and then we can talk collaboratively about any future activities that might be planned to address what you've talked about there. I think from the aesthetic piece, one of the things that we heard during that process, and I can't recall if it was the Neighborhood Association or Friends of Terwilliger, but one of the comments that came back was the either inability to, from a regulation standpoint, or just general objection to the constructing that parking garage that was originally scheduled to go in this location here. I think some of the feedback was that they took a greater look at that, said, that would be pretty impactful to the aesthetic quality of the parkway here for whatever might need to be done in this general area. And that was nixed from the project scope, and so they've moved off and made an adjustment to what the scope would be. So that's just one particular element, but I do think there's certainly an opportunity for us to come back to you with more information, more detailed information that might more directly address the overall intent for what's happening in this corridor itself.
That sounds good. I mean, we're relieved that you've taken that parking garage out.
Yes, sir. Does anyone have any other questions before we get into kind of the phasing and the sequencing of this? All right. Well, then I will dive right in. I'm going to start here on the extreme southern end of campus with the existing parking garage that exists here. It was constructed in the roughly 2008, 2010, maybe 2012 timeline. Suffice to say, it's about a decade old. It is currently a 4-deck parking garage, and it was originally designed to be a 6-story parking garage, but due to funding at the time, they were only able to fund the first 4. So our initial project, the one that will be starting the soonest, will be the completion of that original design from a decade ago, which would see the 2 additional decks added on here. We don't anticipate any tree clearing in this area of any kind. There will be some tree clearing right here in front of the garage, just a couple of limbs, so that they can put in their crane so that they can then bring all of the components in place to perform that vertical elevation of the structure. From a timeline perspective, we anticipate making the award of this construction contract sometime in the spring of 2023. It could be March or April is a rough timeline right now. That's not set in stone, but that's about what we're targeting. And then actual construction, having construction personnel on site, would start roughly in May or June and would carry through for a little more than 12 months, 12 to 15 months we would see there. So through the fall of 24, roughly, is what we're expecting to have this particular portion of the project completed. So that's what we consider on our program. We call that phase 1. And that's the bulk of the scope. There are some other ancillary items. There's some ventilation down on the first floor and some fire suppression, like sprinkler systems, that are being addressed on some of those lower floors. But in terms of actual new construction, those 2 floors coming out of the ground is the primary scope of our phase 1 effort. So I'm going to pause there before I go into phase 2 and see if there's any phase 1 related questions.
One concern I would have is just the lighting and whether it would be shielded, or would the light be shielded from hitting the street and towards the neighborhood?
Right, that's Southwest 6th Avenue Drive, correct, Brian?
6th Avenue, I believe, is up here, if I'm not mistaken.
No, 6th Avenue Drive.
Same thing.
Oh,
Oh, it's the same thing? Well, the parking garage, what street does it abut?
6th
so
Ave.
the parking garage itself is only on the VA's campus itself. So in order to access that parking garage, you can effectively get there off of Terwilliger, the existing entrance into the VA campus. Vehicles would enter into that existing entrance off of Terwilliger Drive. And as you're coming around the loop here to get onto the VA campus, that parking garage sits off of US Veterans Hospital Road. It does not directly connect to any of the neighborhood roads.
Can I jump in a second? Yes. The concern about the lights, especially on the top floors, when there's going to be cars that are going to be going through the upper levels, there is supposed to be, and it is in the design, where there's going to be some kind of shielding there, so that lights don't go on to 6th Avenue or above 6th Avenue. There is shielding that is in the design.
Cheryl, I apologize. When I heard the question about lights, I was thinking about a traffic signal. I was not
No.
thinking about.
Oh, I'm sorry. No.
Yeah,
So
I
understand.
yeah, I think it's more the
Cheryl's
lights.
dead on.
Yes,
Cheryl's dead on. Being put at each level of, actually, there's going to be screening added to the 4 existing levels. And then in addition to that, there'll be screening around the top 2 levels as well. So yes, that should be addressed as part of our construction to keep light from shining onto 6th Avenue Drive here, which, correct, is the same road that I was talking about earlier up here.
Yeah.
thank you.
The height, the 2 additional levels, so that will be up to the street level of 6th Avenue.
It's
I
approximately,
Go ahead, Cheryl.
it's approximately at the street level. It might be just a little bit more. I honestly, Bob, I forget the exact elevations.
I'm gonna get the exact elevations to be able to provide that as an.
So this is Milt. I just wanted to say that this kind of early discussion is exactly, this is very helpful. It's the kind of early discussion of nuts and bolts that I and we, I think, would like to have before anything is set in concrete, just so that we have an understanding of impacts and potential for making changes while the potential still exists. I appreciate very much that we're talking about these things early on and hope that that's the kind of communication we have going forward as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other phase 1 related questions?
Oh, I'd like to ask about construction vehicles, Brian, and the path of construction. We want to make sure that we don't have construction trucks driving on 6th Avenue Drive at all.
So our current, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's, I just want to make sure there's a clear path identified and communicated to the construction firm, and maybe a point person in place for complaints, should any arise.
Understood. We will absolutely identify that point of contact for our construction manager who's going to be on site if there are complaints, where to be able to communicate those. So you will definitely have that identified before construction begins. And then as to your point about construction vehicles, we've been very clear in our project specifications that construction vehicles are only to enter or depart the site via Terwilliger, where the main entrance to campus is. Vehicles would be able to travel through Veterans, and then in between, snaking through some of these buildings here, construction laydown area and construction vehicles would then also park here in the center of the VA's campus. There will be no construction parking in the neighborhood, no construction parking off-site, and they are expressly prohibited from traveling on 6th Avenue anywhere where there are houses. We have discussed, and I believe Michael, who's on the call, may be aware, we've discussed with OHSU, and I believe John Doty has been working this with OHSU, the opportunity for vehicles, if they can't turn around here within this area, if a large construction vehicle accesses the site and is unable to make that turn to then come back out, they'll be able to travel this. This is currently blocked off, a parking connection between the OHSU parking lot and the VA's parking lot, to allow them to simply enter onto 6th and then travel through Gaines back through campus again. They will not be permitted to travel through OHU's campus or to leave via 6th Avenue,
Right.
but basically be able to depart and then loop right back into the VA's campus. So that is the specification we have in our contract, and they will not be able to deviate from that. If they do, we would expect you to submit a complaint, which we will take care of immediately.
Excellent, Brian. Thank you.
Hey, Brian, it's Michael Harrison from OHSU. So we've also, just so you know, we've also communicated through our prime contractor to all of our subcontractors about where they can and can't drive. Unfortunately, fortunately, when the truck drivers decide to not follow the instructions and end up on the neighborhood streets. Fortunately, people like Bob and others are willing to pick up the phone and call me so I can call our prime contractor so they can yell at the subs. You might have better, more polite subcontractors than we have on our project. But I would just say if you end up in a situation like we do, having a number where someone can get in touch with people really quick and get back out to the dump trucks and the cement trucks of the world and encourage them to get back on the right road. Having a quick system in place is probably necessary. I doubt OHSU is a unique situation. So
It was very
Tracking.
beneficial for us too, for Homestead.
Absolutely. Great conversation, and we'll make sure we're clearly communicating who that point of contact is, and maybe even the plan for resolution when something like this might occur, how it will be addressed. So thank you for that. I might move on to phase 2, just in the interest of time. I know you guys have several other things you need to accomplish. We can obviously continue to talk phase 1 if other things come up, but once this parking garage expansion is completed in late 24, we anticipate the award of our phase 2 project, which will not be fully designed at that time. When we award it, we're going to entertain a design build acquisition project, which means that contractor will have some very clear requirements, things you can and cannot do, but we will have them partner with us through the remainder of design. And the phase 2 site is the center of campus here. This area that I said would basically be for the contractors during phase 1. Once phase 1's completed, this area will become the site where phase 2 will occur. And what will happen there is this building that you see here in the center of campus will be demoed. There's a small building here that will be demoed, a structure here that will go away, and then this water tank will likely go away. Not 100% confirmed, but will likely go away. That area then will become the home of the new specialty care facility that is being constructed, and then the associated parking for that specialty care facility. This specialty care building will be located somewhere within this area, but not outside of that area, probably tucked up as close to these other buildings in the center of campus as possible, because that's one of the advantageous pieces of having this plot of land, is that we'd be able to keep staff and patients all in a close location here. So we expect that new building to be located roughly in this area, approximately 297,000 square feet, and will be somewhere between 4 and 7 stories, several of which may be located underground. As you know here, this is a pretty steep hill going up, so the possibility exists that some of that hillside might be excavated so that some of these floors can go underground and to limit the total building height above ground. So that's one of the things that we're focusing in on right now in terms of adherence to the EA and putting that into our project specifications. And then, as mentioned, with the parking garage here, there will be an associated parking garage probably in this area as well, ideally tucked up as close to the rest of campus as possible. And that will be a net 449 space garage. That project, like I said, the award is scheduled to take place in summer of 2024. And then we expect that construction equipment, construction vehicles probably wouldn't arrive out there until the summer or fall of 25, potentially even the spring of 26. We don't have a great amount of clarity on that yet, but in the coming months, that will begin to be a much clearer picture, and we'll certainly keep you updated as we know a little bit better about when that phase 2 construction effort will start. Our estimation at this point in time is that that project, once the contractors show up on site, will take somewhere between 48 and 60 months to complete. So I'll pause there, general phase 2 scope on the table, and see what questions may be generated from that.
So I was wondering how many spaces will be in the phase one expansion of the garage on those two floors?
There are 151 new spaces on the two floors, 75 on each floor. Each floor now currently has 75, so we'll have 151 total. And then the new garage will have 449 total new spaces. Total program called for 600. If you'll recall back in when the environmental assessment started, there was a talk of those other 400 to 450 spaces down here, which are no longer a part of the project. We have resorted back to the original requirement, which was 600 new spaces. So we're not addressing or considering that other piece anymore.
Brian, where will you stage phase two?
So part of that is going to be up to the contractor to give them some flexibility on how they want to approach this. We will be very clear that, and John Dodier with the Med Center has also been very clear that the space available on campus is only going to be this same area in which the construction is taking place. So they're going to have to be pretty considerate in how they lay out their work on campus. Anything else will have to be staged off-site at a location that a contractor identifies on their own. So a warehouse off-site, and by off-site, I mean someplace where they can go and get a large amount of warehouse space or surface area to stage steel and other heavy equipment that then would only be brought up to campus when it's ready to be installed. So there's very little laydown room on site, which means most of the staging will occur off-site. And what they'll do is just bring up the pieces of equipment that are ready on that day.
And
I'm sorry, Jackie.
I was just going to say, and the same requirements about trucks entering and exiting will be for phase two.
Absolutely. Right now, we envision the exact same requirement.
Thank you.
And Jackie, just so you know, I mean, there's all plans, and even in phase one, the contractor he has very limited space. So they're going to have to find parking somewhere else, just like what they're doing with OHSU. Is they're going to have to find a parking lot for all of the crew members, and then they'll have to shuttle them up. There's just not enough room up there for all kinds of the construction vehicles, as well as all of the, the worker vehicles as well.
Right.
And that also has it's twofold, because it also limits the amount of contractor vehicles that are coming on and off campus every day. We're compartmentalizing everyone in shuttles so that there's not hundreds of cars. It's just, a dozen shuttles or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Thanks for the clarification, Cheryl. Does anybody else have any other phase two related questions? So at the conclusion of phase two, one of the greatest benefits to phase two is that this current building 100 main tower structure currently houses a lot of outpatient services, and those outpatient services will all be moving out of that hospital building into this new specialty facility. So we're just taking existing services and moving them over. And what that does for us is it allows us to tackle the phase three scope. The phase three is that part that I mentioned earlier about trying to get these two buildings seismically compliant. Well, part of getting these buildings seismically compliant is going to require, at a minimum, us to address the skin of the building, the exterior structure. Right now, that structure, those panels that are in place, we understand would not perform well during a seismic event. So there's going to be within the buildings, in the basements of the buildings, going in and doing some foundation work, drilling some piles within the building basement structures themselves and shoring up the foundation, but then also addressing, some beam work within the structures. They're both steel frame buildings. So going in and adding some steel bracing, and to get that steel bracing in, we're already going to have to address this exterior skin. So as they're pulling sections of the skin off, they'll be putting and inserting those steel braces, and then putting whatever the new or finished skin of that building looks like at the completion of the project. These two buildings are considered mission critical and life safety at their highest levels from the VA. So what has to happen is not only does this building have to withstand a seismic event structurally, once that seismic event is concluded, both of these buildings need to be immediately operable so that if there are people who are injured and need support, the hospital, two main buildings can function and people can receive treatment there. So there's quite a bit of work that has to be done to the interior and the foundations of these buildings. And so the biggest benefit, as I'm getting back to the phase 2 tie-in, is when we move all those services out and into this new specialty care facility, it creates space to move hospital functions within the hospital. We can then move folks from one floor to another temporarily so that we can have their space vacated to do the interior beam work that needs to be done, or to repair and replace the exterior skin of the building. So this is going to be a long and iterative process internal to these two facilities to strengthen them. We anticipate right now that, so we cannot start this particular phase of the program until phase 2 is finished. We must have this new building in place and all of these services moved into it to create that empty space for a contractor to come in and do that work. Right now, we anticipate, as I said, this project, phase 2, being finished somewhere on or around 2030. So this work will largely take place throughout the 2030s. We anticipate construction starting in 2030, 2031, roughly, and being completed sometime in the mid-late 30s, 2037, 2038, somewhere in that range. So just a generic timeline there, because there is so much in flux. One final piece of phase 2 that's important for you guys to hear is that, again, the main catalyst of the project are these two buildings, 100 and 101. But as I said, after the seismic event is completed, this building needs to be immediately operable. And access to that building comes up through the ramp that comes to their campus on top of the existing parking structure. So one additional part of scope that we're going to have to do to come within the inside of this existing 3-story parking structure that exists below ground, and strengthening the foundation and the walls of that concrete structure so that it can stand up to a seismic event and allow emergency vehicles to have access. So that is the major components of our phase 3 effort. And I'll pause there and see if there are any questions.
I have a quick question, Brian, and that is the infrastructure getting to the hospital. It doesn't, I realize the critical importance of both OHSU and the VA, but I'm not sure the roads getting patients to those situations in that critical time. I'm not sure the roads would, the infrastructure would hold up. So maybe if there's anything you can do for the city.
The utilities, you mean?
Yeah.
It's if there's an earthquake, what's going to happen to the roads to get to the hospital? Hospital will be standing, but how do you get there?
No, you won't be able to get there. Can't get there from here.
I think there's also an issue of the utilities on the hospital in terms of your power and water. I know in conversations with OHSU, they don't have a reserve water tank, so that they'd be short of water, and that's something that would be critical, because probably the supply from the city won't be operable for a while after a subduction zone earthquake.
So one benefit to how Mr. Doty on the call here has operated the facilities shop side of campus is that they have a pretty robust emergency power system. From an electrical perspective, we're pretty confident that even in an event, there will be the opportunity to continue operating the electricity on campus, provided they have, until the petrol storage runs out or diesel storage runs out. Water is a good point. There are multiple, one of the requirements for this is that there are multiple connections to the city system on campus. So we're evaluating right now where they currently have their water service and are there opportunities for redundant water connections in the event that one or more of those supplies fail during the event. We don't have that run to ground yet. Again, this phase 3 effort is, as I mentioned earlier, close to a decade away. So these are all things that we're considering and contemplating at this time. But yeah, the identification of the utilities off campus is certainly anything else? All right. So for Bob or for Ed, again, this is kind of an intro to the program and a jumping off point. We'll look forward to having you guys discuss the ways that you think receipt of this information on a monthly or quarterly or whatever frequency basis. Is it a written submission every few weeks or every month? And then is there a face-to-face every quarter or every month? However you guys think is going to be the best process for you to understand what we're doing on site, we're open to hear that and to try and codify that.
Okay, well, Brian, thank you. Should we then, once we've had that discussion, just work with John Dodier to get the word back to you?
John
would
and
be
Cheryl.
great. And Ed, it doesn't mean that once we, come up with something that it can't change. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like you might want more in-face meetings while we're starting up and we could, maybe just do quarterly after we get rolling. So it's not like one and done is what I'm saying. It's
right. Well, I'm imagining right now, and we'll talk about it, but I'm imagining that just prior to getting started, we might want to have some, increased amount of information, and then maybe during the first phases. But then after that, like you just said, once it's rolling, probably, something less frequent or less, detailed, unless there are changes or unless we have some issues, and then we'll try to make our communications through John or however that's set up.
Ed?
Yep. Milt.
It's Milt. I have a barely related observation and comment and maybe a request. Since we have all these VA people here, it's pretty unusual. I had a very positive experience with a homeless vet who was camped in front of my house for about 5 days. And as it turned out, I'm telling his story, he was receiving assistance from the VA, apparently doing his laundry up there. I don't know if he was eating up there. He was well put together. He was a former drug addict and said that he had been at the VA drug addiction treatment through the treatment center, I think in Vancouver, I'm not positive. And it struck me that like I said, the whole experience was positive from my standpoint. And it struck me that the VA must have something going on that looks superior to what the city and the county are doing when it comes to providing services for homeless and drug addicted people. And I don't know how to do this or how to get it done, but somehow I'd like to get the VA in front of the city and the county to describe what it is they're doing right. Because they are obviously doing something right. And I think it's undoubtedly the case that the city and the county could learn from the VA about caring for homeless and drug addicted people. Lord knows I'm not a flaming liberal on this at all, but it does appear to me that the VA is doing something right. And I'd like to get more information about that out to people who can do something with the information.
Okay, well, that's a little off topic, but it's a good
definitely
topic.
Off topic. Definitely off
so
topic.
I guess my question on John or John, who would we contact, or who should we contact to get more information if we wanted to pursue that, or Cheryl, whoever would like to ask.
Ed, I was starting to put in the chat box that I think it's the VA social workers and mental health professionals who make the biggest impact related to homeless veterans and getting them services.
Okay.
And, it's a big part of our business. It takes a lot of people contact to, to get people to come in for services and get them help, and possibly multiple times at rehabilitation for alcohol or drug abuse or whatever the issue is. But, I can provide the organization with the phone numbers to call at VA. You call the main hospital. That'd be one. That's a starting point. And, we're here for every veteran.
Excellent. Okay, good. Thanks, John. We might want to do that. Milt, if you wouldn't mind, if I get anything from John, I'll share it with you.
Yes, I'll pursue it.
Okay. On that note, Bob, is this related to the project?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
So I think this was very useful. It was really nice to have Brian use the satellite image of the area and go through what that was very clear. I think the fact that you've got this recorded would be quite useful to just make sure that you save the recording and give it as a link. I think it's something that Friends of Terwilliger and other groups would be interested in reviewing. And then I think just based on your presentation, we might have some questions that we might want to send you by email. If you could give us your emails, and I think that would be great.
Okay. Well, we certainly have Cheryl and John, and I've got Brian's email, so we can talk about that after our next presentation. Before we leave this, I do want to say, Cheryl and Brian, thank you very much, both of you, for being here, taking your time tonight and giving us this information. It's very helpful. It helped really bring it into, certainly for me anyway, a better understanding of what's going to happen and why it's going to happen and how it's going to happen. So this was really a really good first reach out, and I really appreciate your time for being here. Thank you. I think you've done an excellent job. And for the rest of you, okay, I see that John has put, and John and Brian both have put their emails in the chat. I will capture those. And if the rest of you haven't already done so, and we're curious about that question about phase 1 and the parking structure and the lighting, John put a pretty interesting little bit of information in the chat in there. So take a look at that if you had any questions on that. So to all of you, to at least Cheryl and Brian, thank you again very much. And if you have to go, John, I understand it. Thank you again for attending, and we will be back in touch for sure.
Thank you for having us. And, you have our information. So just, send us over any questions, and, again, how you would like